Hey, y'all, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We think we have a really fun show planned for you today. Our buddy Mike Griffith's going to be with us a little bit later on. We'll do some recruiting stuff today. There's a little bit of news out there with Kendall Milton, although not a huge surprise necessarily. We'll address that. Some interesting stuff with Kelee Ringo, both what he has recently said and what Jeff Sintel has said about him. We'll do that kind of off the top of the program today. And as I promised you yesterday, I want to dive in a little bit deeper on the subject of Jordan Davis, what ESPN is saying about Davis and the role that Davis could fill for Georgia this season, and an issue that I think is really important around Davis for the Georgia defensive line to also address as well. So we'll kind of do all of that. Dabo Swinney has kind of stepped into a little bit of an odd controversy. We'll address it all as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
ESPN has tossed a pretty nice compliment the way of a Georgia player. We'll address that later on in our program. And I want to spend a good bit of time today kind of going over some of the details about the big day tomorrow. That's right, we're only 24 hours away from DawgNation Days of Summer, the kickoff. So I want to do a lot on that coming up in just a moment to kind of clear up anything that might be going on with that. Those of you making plans to join us even at this late hour, we'll try to make it very accessible for you and very easy for you. We'll do all that coming up in just a moment. Let's do a little recruiting before we get there. There was an announcement of sorts last night on Twitter, or at least yesterday on Twitter, from five-star cornerback Kelee Ringo. Ringo letting the world know that on a certain date, he's got a certain piece of news coming out. Here's the tweet from Ringo, who lets us know that on June 27th, he's going to be dropping his top five. He'll be bringing that out on June 27th. Now, astute observers of Georgia recruiting will know that the date, June 27th, has been a good one for Georgia in the past. That is Samir White's mom's birthday. I'll never forget that. I can't tell you what my own family's birthday is about half the time, but Mrs. White's birthday is June 27th. I'll always remember that because as a part of the class of 2018, that is when White committed to Georgia. So that date, I think, will stick out with a lot of UGA recruiting fans because of that. But Ringo letting us know that on June 27th, he's got a top five coming. And it really brings to mind something for me that Jeff Sintel said on our program yesterday. Many of you heard this. You heard the program yesterday. But I wanted to give you a reminder of something that Jeff said in regards to Ringo kind of putting out these finalists right now, both in terms of what the real number of likely finalists might be for him and what this means in terms of Ringo's established timeline and what Georgia and Georgia's top competition is trying to do here. You may have heard this yesterday, but I want to give you a brief reminder as a way of setting up our conversation for where we want to go when it comes to Ringo here today. Here is Jeff from yesterday.
Here's what I think with Ringo. I think two schools have broken apart from the rest of the pack for quite some time. I think that's Texas and Georgia. I think the University of Georgia can look at this recruitment with Ringo and how they've prioritized him and kind of feel like we've done everything we need here so far to position ourselves in a very good spot for his decision. But then after that, it's the young man's ideas and notions and ideals. He said something recently where he said top schools coming out soon. But from watching this and following this for a very long time now, when guys are ready to make the decision, and maybe it's earlier than what they thought it was going to be, they start remembering, oh, man, I got to put out my top schools. I got to make sure I do this to make sure they get the full immersion of the experience. You know, you talk to people that know things about Kelee Ringo, and I think he's always had it in his mind that he wanted to do it on a certain date, or he wanted to do it on a signing day, on an early signing day, or he wanted to do it at one of the All-American games. That's still, as much as those events have kind of been diluted down by the early signing period, a lot of kids have just had that dream for the longest time. When they've laced up cleats, when they put on the gloves, they've always said, that's going to be me one day. And they still want it to be them one day. So I think that's something to think about there is, can either one of these schools make him feel a certain type of way to just want to go ahead and get it over with rather than committing at one of those predetermined finish lines?
I think it's really interesting from Jeff. Jeff says that Ringo is like a lot of recruits in that when they first envisioned their recruiting process, they envisioned it playing out like so many of these have in the past, where it's multiple schools being a part of drama that stretches late into the process. And it used to be that it was always for everybody going down to the wire. And February. That meant you could commit on an all-star game at the very beginning of the calendar year and still have plenty of time to kind of get everything lined up for the February National Signing Day. But with the way in which early enrollment happens now and the early signing period happens now, that's kind of taken some of the steam out of some of these all-star game type announcements. I think that's interesting from Jeff to say that Ringo, maybe still with an homage back to the old school recruitment, still wants to release his top 5, even though most people like Jeff assume it's really just a top 2. It's really just Georgia or Texas. And, he wants to kind of establish the structure of the way that he initially envisioned his recruitment, even though, as it's turned out, Ringo has kind of whittled this thing down to just 2. One way or another, and I can't tell you where this is going to go, I think Ringo is a little bit like a lot of the recruits that we talk about. Plenty of reason for Georgia fans to feel good about this, but also the folks in Austin, Texas, probably feel like they have plenty of reasons to feel good as well. And if you were listening to Longhorn Nation daily, I'm sure they're having a very different kind of conversation about Ringo than we're probably having here on DawgNation daily, and that is, to a certain extent, just to be expected. So, ultimately, it's difficult to know where this is going to go. But I really believe what Jeff says there at the beginning. I think this is a pretty wise way to sum all this up. When you look at the fun that Ringo had at Georgia when he was there for G-Day and some of the other stuff when he was there for the scavenger hunt not too long ago and the famous photos that kind of came out of all of that, there is no doubt that Georgia, to use a young person's phrase, has kind of shot with Kelee Ringo here. There's no doubt that Georgia has taken its best shot when it comes to impressing Ringo. And ultimately, if that's not good enough, I don't know that Georgia can say we should have done this recruitment any different here. I think Georgia has worked really hard to put itself in a really good position. It's obviously going to be one of the finalists coming up on June 27th. And as Jeff said, can it now push a little harder and make an even more enticing sales pitch to maybe make the actual commitment coming up after this? Maybe not have to wait all the way into December to get that done. Maybe keep that pedal to the metal and actually win this thing head-to-head against Texas. We shall wait and see about that. One more recruiting nugget I want to get into before we move on to something else, and this is not a surprise to me, just given, nor should it probably be to you, nor probably is it a surprise to you given the stuff that's been out there, but Kendall Milton did announce, his family has announced, that he's going to be at Georgia, obviously, this weekend for the official visit, and then he'll take his final official visit to his 4th finalist, Alabama, after that. In fact, here's some of the stuff on social media about that. Kendall tweeted this out. Chris Milton also tweeted as well. Milton's message is that it's been a busy June thus far, but it's not over. Georgia, you're up, and Alabama, you're batting cleanup. Now, that's essentially a replication of the same tweet that Milton sent out last week, heading towards LSU, then with Georgia after that. So he's kind of done the same thing over and over again, and Alabama will get that spot. The fact that it's the so-called last official visit in this case, I don't think that means as much for me. Now, obviously, you got to respect Alabama. Alabama won head-to-head with Georgia for a running back a year ago with Trey Sanders. So you got to respect Alabama in this recruitment. It also seems like Alabama's gone heavy on Zachary Evans because of the presence of Damian Pierce in this 2020 class. So how does that impact Milton one way or another? I won't even begin to speculate on that. But you'll respect Alabama in the midst of all of this, and yet still, there is a kind of confidence that I think a lot of Georgia fans have when it comes to Milton. I think Georgia knows, and I think Georgia fans assume, that the Dogs are set up for a really impressive official visit this weekend. You still hear the noise and the chatter coming out of Columbus. That's probably not going to die down. Buckeyes fans feel like they're in a pretty good spot on all of this too. But once again, much the same way you said about Ringo a moment ago, you can't look at the way that Georgia's recruited Milton and said it really should have done anything any different. Milton's had his finalists. Georgia's made its pitch. When you look at the offensive line this program's bringing in, when you look at the recent history of success for the running back position, how could Georgia offer more than it's seemingly offering? Here's the one thing I do know for sure. This is what makes DawgNation Daily so fun here in the summertime. The drama is intense. And listen, we're not going to see Georgia get every single one of these recruits that Dog fans would like to see them get. That's probably not going to happen, but they're going to get their fair share. They're going to get plenty of them. And the twists and turns this takes along the way, the announcements, the surprises. Listen, I love the drama. This time of year is full of it. And when it's all said and done, my guess is Georgia's going to be looking pretty good. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast on all the various podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, and the world-famous DawgNation.com and everything else. Y'all, I am shot out of a cannon excited about tomorrow, the kickoff of our DawgNation Days of Summer. This is it. The big one is here. And so many of you have let us know that you're making plans on being there. And boy, I'm thrilled about that. The one thing I do want to let you know is there's been some question of, is it sold out? It's really not sold out. We have contingency plans. If 2,000 people show up tomorrow, we've got a room to put them in. So we've kind of got a contingency plan if it's just a gigantic overflow crowd. So there is no sold out here for this. My understanding is there are still some rooms left. You can kind of get in under the gun and be a VIP with us at the VIP reception. Now, the VIP reception is limited. The actual event itself that starts at 6 p.m. is not, but the VIP reception is limited, and they're wanting to cut this thing off as it stands now. I'm trying to get them to hold a few spots here to get some more people in. So do me a favor and don't hesitate. Jump on in there. Get that room booked so you can be with us and be a part of the VIP reception. At this point in time, those are the only VIP slots we have left, the ones coupled with room assignments. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll see you there. In fact, let me give you the timeline on some of this just for a moment. For those of you making your way over, don't forget, your garden admission is included with your stay at the lodge, and you can get into that tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. So kind of take advantage of that, kind of take a tour of all of that. There's so many great amenities to soak in and enjoy. You can spend all day doing that. Case and Staff Room opens at 2 p.m., That's where we're going to be doing our event from. Lodge check-in kind of begins at 4 for those of you who are staying over. The VIP reception is going to start at 5. And then DawgNation Days of Summer, the big event where the entire public's invited to, not just the folks staying at the lodge with us, but also the folks who are just in that West Georgia area want to drive over. That gets going at 6 p.m. Of course, the next day, you can come see us do DawgNation Daily. We're going to do that Lakeside on Friday morning at 10 a.m. like always. And then for those of you who've signed up to be a part of this, we're going to play some golf as well starting around noon. Now, let me give you one piece of information here. And let me see that graphic on the screen one more time if you don't mind. For those of you who are driving over, here's really important what you put in your GPS. I'm going to be hyper-specific for a moment, but for those of you who are making plans to be with us, you'll be glad that I did this. For your GPS, please put in this location, the Lodge at Callaway Resort and Gardens. That's what you want to put in for your GPS. Or you can put in the address, which is 4500 Southern Pine Drive in Pine Mountain, Georgia. Put one of those two things in. In other words, don't put in Callaway Gardens. That's going to send you to a slightly different place. You want to go to the Lodge at Callaway Resort and Gardens, or the address, which is 4500 Southern Pine Drive in Pine Mountain, Georgia. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Put that in, the lodge, and the address for the lodge, which is 4500 Southern Pine Drive, and you'll get right where you need to go. We'll have some signage up. We'll make it easy for you to see, but it's time to start thinking about the real specifics of this as we get ready for DawgNation Days of Summer, which kicks off tomorrow at Callaway Resort and Gardens. I'm heading there right after the show, and I cannot wait for that. Now, with all that said, let us go around the doghouse here today, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And Connor Riley wrote about this at DawgNation.com recently. I thought this was interesting, that ESPN recently highlighted Jordan Davis as one of the potential breakout stars for the Bulldogs here in 2019. Some of you may have thought, well, I thought Davis broke out a year ago, but ESPN has its own definition for how it wants to use this stuff. And here's what ESPN recently said about Davis. The writer is Alex Scarborough, who says that Davis quietly had a stellar freshman campaign, despite not arriving until the summer. He played in 11 of 14 games, started 4, and while it's true he didn't line up the stat sheet with only 25 tackles and just a sack and a half, as an interior lineman, that's not an accurate measure of his performance. What is? How about earning a spot on the coach's freshman All-SEC team? He was also a Football Writers Association of America freshman All-American. I could have added to that, but that's Alex Scarborough from ESPN. Now, Georgia fans by now know the value of Davis, and I think the best way to explain why Davis became so valuable is to go back and listen to the concern that Kirby Smart had at the beginning of the season about how little depth and maybe how little size Georgia had with its defensive line. Here is what Kirby said right before the start of the 2018 season.
As far as the defensive line, we don't have the depth we need. We're in constant search and need of defensive linemen. I don't know that we've gotten bigger at that position. Certainly you want big, but in this day and age we have, you got to be able to run sideline to sideline too.
So listen, that's Kirby Smart saying, listen, we don't have the defensive lineman we need right now. This is the beginning of the year. And when you see Davis emerge and you see him play the role that he played, all of a sudden you're left with the questions of, wow, where would Georgia have been if Davis didn't step up and clog the middle and become the run stopper the way that he did? In fact, This became so true that when Kirby Smart was asked this spring about difference-making defensive linemen to go along with ESPN highlighting Davis as a potential breakout player, Kirby Smart himself called Davis a difference maker. Here's what Smart said during the spring.
Difference makers. I think Tyler Clark's a difference maker when he wants to be, when he's playing really hard and playing quick. In a very unique way, Jordan Davis is a difference maker. I mean, he's not explosive and quick, but he's a mountain of a man, and he's hard to move. And in the SEC, you need a guy like that.
So Kirby Smart says, we think that Jordan Davis is also a difference-making player because of the size and the ability to draw those double teams with blocks. However, here's where I think some additional comments need to be made about Davis. First of all, in terms of a even bigger difference maker or an even bigger breakout in 2019 than it was in 2018, you also get the sense that Kirby Smart's challenging Davis to make sure he fulfills that potential. We've heard issues with Kirby related to Davis's weight, pushing him to stay in good shape, pushing him to stay in top-flight physical condition. That's something to be thought about. But ultimately, the Georgia story in 2019 is, to me, not going to be told by, does Davis break out more than he already is? I think that Davis himself has kind of already proven himself to be a top-flight SEC defensive tackle. His breakout year is 2018. The real question for me, though, becomes, does someone break out to go alongside him? Does somebody step up and provide another version of what Davis already does? Kirby, going back to signing day for 2019, talked about Georgia's need to add more defensive linemen. Guys like Zion Logan, Tyman Mitchell, and Bill Norton. Obviously Trayvon Walker as well, maybe chief among all those guys. Georgia needed those defensive linemen and brought them in. Really, for Georgia to be as good as it can be on the defensive line in 2019, Georgia needs one of its 2019 signees to do a little bit like what Jordan Davis did here in 2018. If that happens, then Georgia may be in pretty good shape when it comes to stopping some of these SEC rushing attacks. We will see where that goes. It's Around the Doghouse, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. There are a few issues around your home that can point to serious things. A crack in your foundation, some sort of, almost like a fault line crack down there, or wet spot, damp basement, water seeping through. These can be issues involving the structural integrity of your home, which is a big deal, and you want smart people to help you fix it. You want to trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia because they have a full-time engineer on staff. And the best news of all is the phone number to get in contact could not be easy to remember. Simply give them a call at 678-ESOG now. The number, once again, 678-ESOG now. So if you've got a cracked foundation or some water getting through down in your basement, trust Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They're full-time engineer on staff. They will get your house fixed and back in top-flight condition again very soon. All right, we got a lot more to do here today on DawgNation Daily, and it rolls on now with our buddy Mike Griffith. Great to have him with us, and you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Good to have Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily as always. Mike, we appreciate your time. Good reporting from you here as of late at DawgNation.com. And let me start with something that I haven't really had a chance to get into yet, but I think that your take on this is going to be kind of interesting. Obviously, Georgia yesterday came out with a new alcohol policy where, even though the SEC has now lifted the restrictions on stadium-wide alcohol sales, Georgia, to the surprise of probably few, has said this is not something we intend to do for 2019. Let me just kind of start with an open-ended question on this, Mike. What do you make of Georgia kind of not joining with some of its SEC brethren in selling this stuff in the common areas stadium-wide? Why does Georgia not want to do this?
Yeah, and not really. It's not that they changed anything. It's that they're standing pat with the policy that they have, like Alabama, Auburn, and Mississippi State to this point. And I think it's because they want to protect the environment there at Sanford Stadium. Sanford Stadium is a great fan-friendly environment. I think you see a lot of times 3 generations of folks there. Sometimes even 4 all at once. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about putting that many people in a stadium, 93,000, and yet that environment just has such a friendly, small-town feel. And I think they're very mindful of that. Greg Sankey's mindful of that as well. And, really what the decision was by the SEC was to allow each school to determine its own policy. It used to be that nobody in the SEC could serve alcohol in general seating areas. now they're saying that schools can determine their own policy. And President Moorhead told me the day before the vote that Georgia feels good about its environment. And Greg Sankey had said that even when the SEC moves forward with this, these schools that are going to sell alcohol will have restrictions in place. Now, Georgia does have alcohol allowed in their suites and in some premium seating areas, but McGarity told me that the way they looked at the alcohol wasn't about a revenue generator. It wasn't about that for Georgia. It was about balancing the fan amenities against that environment that they really strive to protect. They don't want to turn this into an NFL stadium.
Be that as it may, if you put like the two camps side by side on this, those who don't want expanded alcohol sales in Sanford Stadium, those that do, I get the impression that those that don't, I don't know the numbers, if it's a vote, I don't know what percentage Georgia fans favor one way or another, but I do get the sense those that don't want expanded alcohol sales feel a lot more passionate about the subject and are seemingly a lot more vocal. I mean, let's face it, there's no shortage of drunkenness in Sanford Stadium as it is. The people who've been drinking outside the stadium will just kind of continue to do that. So I get the sense, they're a little less passionate about this one way or another. But it's the side of folks that maybe don't want this, don't want the new concession areas to feature that kind of thing, that are a little bit more passionate. Do you get the sense of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, it's kind of like I equate it to speeding. BA. I mean, I think there's speeding everywhere, but where it's patrolled, I think there's less speeding, right? And you don't want people speeding through your neighborhood. And some people might say, well, I'm only going 5 or 10 miles over. But, the people that don't want that 5 or 10 miles usually have kids playing out in the yard. And I would say the same about Sanford Stadium. The people that are passionate about, wanting to protect that environment, they want to bring their kids to the stadium and not have to worry about, maybe somebody overindulging. And to your point, there are people that do that, and alcohol does get sometimes sneaked into the stadium, I'm sure. But I think that if you went to the general sales of alcohol in all the seating, your environment would change. I would say I do think there's a difference between NFL Sunday stadiums and college football stadiums in the SEC that don't serve alcohol in general seating. That's not to say that people aren't going to drink. Some people will. They'll, like you said, they'll find ways. But then we got to ask ourselves, where do we draw the line? As far as, what's next. I know they don't allow smoking in there, right? Because smoking affects the person next to you. And while maybe you can't get drunk off of the fumes off of somebody's breath, you certainly could suffer if their behavior gets out of line. So, if marijuana gets legalized, will people be able to vape in stadiums? There's all sorts of issues and rights, and where do you draw the line? But I think where Georgia's concerned, to get back to your question, I think it's a deal where Sanford Stadium's got a really great thing going for it, and nobody wants to risk it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. This will be my final question on this topic. Do you think that Georgia's selling alcohol in the common areas in 2020, once they've had another year to think about this, another year to plan for this? Is this a one-year decision? Do you think in 2020 they'll do something differently?
The only thing I could really maybe see is just more premium seating. I know we've talked about the club level, which kind of seems ridiculous, that the 400-seat club level area where the highest donors are the McGill Society, you have to donate $100,000 or more just to be able to buy 2 tickets to get into this 400-person room that's cordoned off on the 200 level East Campus Drive side of the stadium. Maybe we'll see some expanded areas for premium seating. But I just don't believe, and again, I could be wrong, just sharing my opinion, Sanford Stadium is a really special place, and, not all stadiums are like that. They're just not. I mean, there's other great stadiums, don't get me wrong. I thought it was interesting the same day that this was announced, Alabama came out and said Bryant Denny's not going to do it. And Auburn said Auburn's not going to do it. And I think Mississippi State's got some local codes. I know Vanderbilt has to run it through some of their local zoning before that they can get it approved. I'll be curious to see if it'll be sold at Vanderbilt Stadium when Georgia opens up there. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw maybe some more premium seating expansion or alternatives. But I think Georgia's pretty dug in on protecting Sanford Stadium's game day environment.
Oh, let me change the subject for a moment. You had an interesting conversation with David Pollack that was a part of some of your recent work at DawgNation.com, and his comments on the transfers and even the stuff involving Fromm and Fields have gotten a lot of attention. What have you personally thought of the reaction to some of Pollack's comments? What's been your reaction to the reaction, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think David Pollack is, I've said from the start, I'm a fan of David Pollack on college game day because he'll tell you what's on his mind, and he's not afraid to step on some toes and tell it like it is, or tell it like he sees it. And I respect people that do that because it's tough sometimes swimming upstream, and everybody says they want to hear it how it is until they don't like how it is, and then they don't want to hear how it is. I don't know. I mean, I think the whole Fields Fromm thing, to me, I don't understand why it's controversial. What happened. It's a part of Georgia, and it was exciting when Justin Fields was on the roster, and now Jake Fromm doesn't have to look over his shoulder, and Justin Fields is going to play in a new offense, and some people will root for Justin Fields in Ohio State, and some people won't. To me, that's sports. It's sports. It's like when a player gets traded off of your team that you really like, and he goes and plays for another team. And should he have stayed or should he have gone? It doesn't matter. They did what was best for them, and we're just now observing. So what I don't like about it is I see people get angry about it, and I don't think you should get angry. I think it says a lot for Georgia that Justin Fields wanted to come to Georgia and compete, and I think it says a lot for Kirby Smart, the way he handled that to the very end. And now a young man starts his career over somewhere else. And Jake Fromm, has, the job to himself. We know he's the starter. Remember last year, Kirby went to great extent not to name a starter. And Justin leaving provided an opportunity for Dwan Mathis. And now Dwan's here, and albeit going through some difficult circumstances, but, Dwan coming to Georgia and now going through these circumstances, we've been able to learn a lot more about Georgia, or maybe not learn it, but we've been able to see how Kirby Smart and the University of Georgia and the city of Athens has handled a family crisis in model fashion, ideal fashion. To me, it's been one of the most gut-wrenching but also heartwarming stories of the off-season is to see how Kirby Smart and the University of Georgia and Ron Corson and the training staff have handled Dwan Mathis, and to see how the fans have rallied around it. It's kind of like the butterfly effect, right? Without A and B happening, C doesn't happen. And I just keep seeing Georgia get better and better. I see it get better academically. I see it get better on the football team. I see Kirby continue to grow as a coach. He's only 43 years old. People forget Nick Saban was, he'll turn 68 this year. So Nick Saban was 49 when he left Michigan State in 1999. Kirby Smart's 43, to put that into perspective. And I see the city of Athens continuing to grow and get better. So maybe I'm looking at things differently, but I'm right here. I'm right across the street from campus. I'm around it every day. And all I can tell you, BA, is things just keep getting better and better as far as I can tell. And so maybe I guess my answer would be I'm a little puzzled to see any type of negativity when Pollack gives an opinion or we just report the news. I mean, if you're a Georgia fan, I don't know what you really got to be too uptight about right now.
We got some more stuff coming with Mike Griffith in just a moment. Let me remind you before that, though, there's some great buy one, get one sales going on at Kroger this week on some of those really cool summer items like Mayfield ice cream, grill seasoning, Nathan's beef franks, and a whole lot more. You can start saving right now when you use your Kroger card, so check that out at your local Kroger. Mike, I was interested in the piece that you wrote last night for DawgNation.com about the point spread. And this is the time of year when a lot of these point spreads start coming out for the look-ahead lines later in the season. The week one stuff is now kind of all over the place. And Georgia's 24.5-point favorite right now, I guess, on the road at Vanderbilt to start the season. On the one hand, that seems about right to me. On the other hand, some of the weapons that I think that Georgia will use a lot this season, Zamir White at running back, some of the freshmen at wide receiver. Maybe week one, that's not the breakout moment for any of those particular weapons. What do you see Georgia in comparison to a road day in the SEC against a team in Vanderbilt that's been a little frisky with some teams in the past? 24.5, does that feel right or too much for you for the Dogs on the road against the Commodores?
Yeah, probably not enough for me, and that's just because of a couple of things. One, I think I don't want to say learned a lesson because I think that that's oversimplifying. But the way this college football playoff works, it is a beauty contest again. One of the things about the BCS and when they had the computers and all that, BA, was they capped the margin of victory in the formulas. In other words, it didn't pay off to run the score up on people with the BCS computers. That was one of the provisions they put in there. But human beings do appear to be affected by that, and I don't think Kirby would put points on the board to run the score up and hurt anybody's feelings. But I do think that you've got to get Jake Fromm in this offense very well acquainted with James Coley's system early on, and I do think there's a lot of young receivers that need to get valuable reps. And so maybe last year when we would see Jake Fromm or Justin Fields handing off the entire fourth quarter, and that first half of the season, if you reflect back, and I can remember, I did a lot of stories on this, there'd be 10 or 11 straight runs called in the fourth quarter. It was almost like there was a running clock. In fact, there was one game when there was a running clock. And, now we look back on that and say, boy, maybe that was an opportunity where Georgia should have kept on working on its passing game a little bit more, maybe gotten Jake a little bit more work, because we remember on third downs the first half of the year, the third and longs, they weren't real effective until really after the bye week, right? So I think this year, because it's a new offense, or a modified offense, I should say, because there's a lot of young receivers that need they need practice, okay? And I know Kirby wants them to block, but they need practice catching the ball too. And these backs they have, they're only backups because you can only have two out there. They're not backups from a talent perspective. So when you put the 2s and the 3s in there at Georgia, that doesn't mean that these guys can't hit the home run and score from anywhere on the field. So it may be that Georgia has the second-team offensive line in there. But maybe Georgia's second-team offensive line is still better than half the lines in the SEC. So even if Kirby, quote-unquote, calls the dogs off, you're still looking at a bunch of 4 and 5 stars out there that are competing to start. And so that's why I think 24.5 is not enough, because I think Georgia's offense is going to be that explosive, and I think they're that deep.
Well, Michael, it'll certainly be interesting to see. This season's going to be here before we know it. We appreciate your time here today on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to chatting with you some more on the program soon, and look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com in the days ahead. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, D. I appreciate it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Interesting stuff from Mike Griffith there at DawgNation.com. You can read him, of course, each and every week, and it's good to have him here as a part of our program as well. By the way, before we get into our SEC Through and kind of dive heavy into this, there is one thing I want to make you aware of, and I've been telling you about this now for a while, and I know these things are selling like crazy to the point where there's only, I believe, a limited number left. So if you want to get involved on this, you got to make sure you do it. It's the officially licensed UGA cornhole board that's going to be autographed and personalized by the Georgia legend himself, Nick Chubb. This is an incredible gift, especially with Father's Day. That's this weekend, so you're thinking about some of those really cool things, like that for the dad in your life. Or you're like me and you're just a memorabilia collector. You want all the Georgia stuff that you can get. Well, this is that hard-to-find item that's going to be that must-have thing for that Georgia collector in your life. The officially licensed cornhole boards, one of those boards is going to be signed and personalized by Nick Chubb. The website to go to find out more information about this and to order yours today is westgeorgiacornhole.com/Nick Chubb. For those of you who were not watching on video, I'll read this again. Understand this is all written out, no abbreviations. westgeorgiacornhole.com/Nick Chubb. What an incredible gift. Nick, cool enough to sign these and personalize one of the boards from each of these sets. It's going to be a great thing. By the way, as well, for those of you who are joining us for DawgNation Days of Summer tomorrow, we are also giving one of these away tomorrow, too. And that's going to be fun. We have a lot of giveaway stuff that we're doing tomorrow, a lot of prizes, a lot of just gifts, no register to win type thing. We're just giving a lot of stuff away tomorrow. So it's just going to be an incredible time. Can't wait to see you there for a DawgNation Days of Summer, and can't wait to show off one of those West Georgia Cornhole Board things for you tomorrow there as well. And somebody's going to eventually get that one signed and personalized by Nick Chubb, and you'll be the big winner there on that. All right, let me do the SEC through for just a moment. And if you don't mind, I want to start with a non-SEC story, but this in a roundabout way impacts the SEC. there is a weird criticism and controversy, I guess minor controversy, kind of surrounding Dabo Swinney right now. This is a very odd story. Dabo does an interview in February with Mike Krzyzewski as a part of Sirius XM Radio, whatever channel, whatever show. And in that, there's a discussion of the national championship game or whatever, and he talks about going back to Alabama. And Swinney, in the midst of making this discussion, makes kind of a, I guess it's probably fair to say, a tasteless joke, comparing himself to Osama bin Laden, the way that bin Laden would hide around in caves in Afghanistan. Swinney was joking about when he goes back to Alabama, he has to essentially do the same thing. He said this in February, but it's only become controversial this week. There was a writer for a Clemson fan site that found this interview, published these remarks, and then people picked it up on Twitter, and it's turned into this whole big deal now where, like the Paul Feinbaums, the national media entities, they've now started to take notice, and there's some columns being written, and Swinney's kind of getting bashed for this. This is pretty clearly a joke in bad taste, but I think it does say something about our modern society that this kind of stuff is not controversial until Twitter gets a hold of it. Viewed through the prism of Twitter, everything, I guess, somehow seems worse. But the comment itself is obviously not the kind of thing that can be easily defended. I think that's when if he were to hear himself say this, would probably like to go back and not have made kind of a tasteless joke about Osama bin Laden, just given the serious, weight that name carries in American society dating back to 9/11. Here's the football point I'll make about this, and I'll do it kind of quickly. This is an unforced error that Nick Saban would not make. So if you want to talk about Dabo Swinney being the next Nick Saban, Saban will not do this. Now, Saban's had his issues before with things when it comes to, I guess, off-color comments and stuff like that. The difference between Saban and Swinney is Saban doesn't care. And I don't think that Swinney wants this to be a part of his kind of overall public demeanor. This is just the kind of unforced error that I don't think Kirby Smart would make this mistake. I don't. I think that Smart's a lot more careful with the things that he says. Dabo is at Clemson, and no disrespect to Clemson, but compared to a lot of the other programs in the SEC, Clemson's a smaller fan base. It's a smaller media market. It's just a smaller program in general. That doesn't stop them from being very good on the field, but Clemson's not as big a football program as some of the top programs in the SEC are. It's just not. And so, therefore, you don't get quite as polished from a media standpoint because you're not surrounded by media all the time the way that you are in some of the SEC programs, which means that when you do speak publicly, sometimes you're maybe not as careful as you need to be. I think that Dabo has stepped into it a little bit here. I don't think it's an egregious error. It's not the kind of thing he can't come back from, but it's the kind of mistake that I think that some of the other top coaches in college football probably would not have made. Let me do actually, I was going to do a story on Sports Illustrated. Let me hold off on that for a moment. Let me briefly mention something that Connor brought up to us yesterday as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down, that in the midst of everything we've been doing with Georgia, Florida, it's also important to remind that Florida did lose a commitment this week from a four-star defensive back, Joel Williams, who is from Baton Rouge. He decommitted from Florida. There's a little bit of angst amongst Gator fans for that, and there's even some online chatter that there may be another four-star commit about to exit the Florida program here as well. So we'll lick our chops and get ready to see that when it happens. As I said before, I wish I was a better person. I am not. I do enjoy this, and Florida's having a rough time on the recruiting trail. We'll make that your SEC through. And let me briefly remind you about my friends at Online Trading Academy. When it comes to having more money, we all want it. That means you got to use the markets to your advantage. And the best investment you can make right now is the decision to invest in yourself. Learn how the markets work. Spectrum of asset classes, variety of trading styles. Online Trading Academy gives you a chance to learn in the classroom and online. Find them online at tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's trading with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. All right, we do have an official sanctioned summer Q&A today, so let me give these questions, and then we'll take some answers here both on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, in our video comment section, and everything else. Here are our official questions for today. We talked to Mike Griffith about the Georgia alcohol policy of before, basically maintaining status quo, at least in the common areas on that. Do you agree with the new alcohol policy? And I say new in the fact that Georgia's going to decide not to do what some of the other SEC teams are going to do here. Do you agree with that policy for Georgia? I'm curious to hear what you say about that. We talked about ESPN's statement of Jordan Davis being the breakout star for UGA this season. Who do you think the breakout star is going to be? Either of the rising sophomores like Davis, which what ESPN chronicled, or some of those other potential names that are out there. Give us your thought on the breakout star for UGA. And I'd love to hear you weigh in on Dabo Swinney. Is this the kind of comment that's inexcusable? Is this out of line? And what does it say about Dabo Swinney if it is? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on Swinney and kind of the joke in bad taste referencing Osama bin Laden. You can give us all your thoughts on that. We'll take a lot of these comments here today as a part of DawgNation Daily, and then allow folks to hit us up on Twitter as well, at DawgNation Daily as well. Let me pull up the Facebook comments, and we'll get rocking and rolling in here on that and take a few of these as a part of our regular broadcast here today. On Facebook, Cyrnard Watson talking about Georgia as a point spread favorite against Vanderbilt, saying that it ought to be basically an easy win for Georgia there that day. And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that. I feel very confident to say it's probably going to be an easy win for Georgia. I guess what my question is, given what we think the offensive weapons for Georgia might look like by the end of the season, a lot of Zamir White, a lot of George Pickens, a lot of Dominic Blaylock, my question would be, do you think Georgia's going to be able to institute enough of that kind of stuff into the week one game plan to get style points right away? I think that Georgia's going to probably get for itself some style point victories. I'm curious if week one's going to be one of those moments when they're able to do that, either because they just choose to hold back Zamir White a bit because he's still recovering from injury, and freshman wide receivers may be really good at the end of the season. Are they, especially guys that did not go through spring practice, are they ready to go by the beginning of the season? I think that's something to think about. Of course, Kebo Weir also mentions another wide receiver who's not a freshman who could be highlighted that day. He says, Kebo says, I need D-Rob to make an impact. He's been kind of a ghost thus far, and even on G-Day, we didn't get to see as much of D-Rob as we would like, but maybe Kebo will get the wish, and maybe we will see Demetrius Robertson heavily involved there in week one to that. Lawton Mullen, on the subject of Dabo Swinney, says the comments could really hurt their recruiting attention, would give UGA the nudge in the national recruiting spotlight. Yeah, I wonder how much of a shelf life this is going to have. Ultimately, I think the outrage culture will kind of move on and decide to be outraged about something else pretty soon, and Dabo will kind of get pushed to the kind of the back page on that a bit. But it is the kind of thing that's going to cause someone to raise their eye on Swinney, maybe just a little bit. If you're not careful with these comments here, what else are you not careful about? What else are you not as polished as you should be in regards to? So I think this is going to stick to Swinney for a little while, but ultimately it's probably not going to stick to him much beyond that. And maybe it's fair to say that it shouldn't stick with him forever, too. By the way, before we wrap up the show, can I give a huge thanks here? Ken Ott, a great Georgia fan living out in Colorado, and his family, they sent me an incredible gift. I want you to take a look at this. Y'all know how big of a Gator hater I am. They sent me these framed pictures of ticket stubs of Georgia from the beatdown of Florida back in 2017. What an incredible thing this is. I've already got these hanging in my office, and there have already been people here at DawgNation World Headquarters that kind of wandered over and paid such close attention to these really, really cool gifts. I got to tell you, that means the world to me to be able to get a package like that in the mail from Ken and his family. Great Georgia fans, just terrific Gator haters, which is always something that's near and dear to my heart. It was a real honor to be able to get that from them, an incredible gift, and I wanted to show that off on the show here today, and that's hanging in my office. And listen, I am incredibly, incredibly proud of that. So thanks for the gift, and thanks to all of you who are a part of our program each and every day here on DawgNation Daily. And by the way, speaking of Gator hating, we enjoy doing that around here. And Ken he wrote a letter to me, and he talked about how he was just like me, thinking it was very important for Georgia fans to be Gator haters. And yeah, that was part of our big message, in the past, that if you're a Georgia fan, you got a lot of rivalry choices. We think the one, though, that has the most potential leverage for UGA is Florida. That being good against Florida over the course of multiple years, decades even, has a way of just benefiting the program in a way that beating up on some of your other rivals wouldn't necessarily guarantee. And over the last couple of years, we've certainly seen examples of that. That's when we do our Gator Hater Updater here on the program. We let you know how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. How about 956 days? Doesn't that have a nice ring to it? And, of course, by the way, as we get ready to wrap up on today's program, I'll remind you that tomorrow, DawgNation Days of Summer kicks off at Callaway Resort and Gardens. I cannot wait to see you there. Have a great day, everybody. And on video. Good to have all of you with us. We'll dive in here and get a lot more of your comments on the summer Q&A and kind of anything else you want to discuss. I was on Facebook a moment ago. I'll go on YouTube here for right now, and we will get a lot of chatter going. And as we do that, I'll remind you about my friends at R.S. Andrews. It's not as hot today as it has been, but the heat's coming back, and you want to take advantage of this relatively mild weather right now to do what you need to do so that when it gets really, really hot again, your home is as cool as it needs to be. We talk about the R.S. Andrews cool down every day because this time of year, some of you need your house to be cooled down, and that's why you want to check out R.S. Andrews and their $99 Smiley tune-up. We say that story after story, they deliver smiles, and when it comes to your air conditioning system, they'll give the tune-up to get it right back to factory fresh specs, or if it's time to replace, they're also good with you on that, too. Either way, just trust Dari and the gang over there at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. On YouTube here for a moment, Brian McPhail says on the subject of Georgia, I think it's Georgia anyway, going undefeated for the regular season. I wouldn't mind seeing that. VTW asks a good question, and I'm going to pull back the curtain on this for a minute. VTW says, when will DawgNation get some Zachary Evans highlights? And this is part of, I always say this, our audience is very astute. So we play a lot of highlights for a lot of recruits when we talk about them, but I guess we don't have the Zachary Evans package. Here's what I sneakily suspect, and there was even a piece at DawgNation.com today that kind of led me to believe this. I just don't think even after vacation, even after coming back tan, rested, ready, in a good mood, I don't get the sense that Jeff's quite buying the Zachary Evans thing as of yet. Now, listen, he's got sources, he's a reporter, and I'm just a guy that sort of spouts off my opinion. I sort of get the impression that Jeff is still pretty skeptical of the whole Zachary Evans thing. So maybe I might go about it my own to get some Zachary Evans highlights just so we can have some to show on here. But in terms of what Jeff really thinks, I think that and this is me just speculating out loud here, Jeff will be able to speak for himself later on this afternoon as part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. But I sort of get the impression that Jeff is a lot more on the Milton train in terms of the possibility for Georgia than he is the Evans train. But that could change because let's face it, when information evolves, opinions evolve as well. And Jeff's opinion on this may also evolve as new information becomes available. But that's sort of what I get the sense of right now.
I can confirm there will be Zachary Evans highlights this afternoon.
There you go, VTW. Good job, buddy.
I put in a request for it this morning. We just didn't have time to get it done.
There you go. I love the fact that Connor says I put in a request, as if there's like some magical bunch of elves who will deliver this stuff for us, as opposed to us having to scrape this together for ourselves. But there will be Zachary Evans highlights. That is exciting to see. Good work, Connor Riley, on that. By the way, RT367 mentions Brian Herring as his breakout. Now, that's a really good name. I will clarify that when ESPN wrote about their breakouts, they were only looking at rising sophomores. I really don't know why they chose that particular subset to highlight, but they only looked at that. If we look at the entire roster overall, RT, there is a chance that Herring may be the best name of all, because I would say there are a lot of SEC fans who've never heard of Brian Herring. Because if we look at, do you know who the number 4 running back at LSU is, for instance? So, there are a lot of folks who maybe haven't heard of Herring yet, but after that Vanderbilt game, I think he'll be very well known. I think he'll have his face on ESPN as a part of those highlights. He'll get a lot of attention there. So it could be that Herring fits the mold of a true breakout name about as well as anybody could. I think that's a pretty good choice there. Dog Life says, ask and you shall receive. That's exactly right. Y'all, some of you said this to me on Twitter, and it's true. I'm going to do exactly like Evans, the way that I did with Pickens. I'm going to keep bringing it up. I'm going to keep letting, let it get shot down. I got thick skin. I sleep fine at night. I don't care how much of a pipe dream it seems. I'm going to keep talking about it, and eventually it may fall into place, as these things have a way of doing. So I'm probably going to take that same strategy with Zachary Evans that I took with Pickens.
Kendall Milton announces a visit to Batman. You're already off the train.
No. You know that's not true. I said this during the show. I ain't worried about Kendall Milton going to Alabama. By the way, actually, let me finish my thought on this, and I'll get some more of those comments coming in. I feel like that Georgia is in a good enough position with Milton that it can still do its thing with Zachary Evans. I do. I don't. Listen, if Georgia's trying to play the either-or game on this, then I think they would have to be a little bit more quiet about it, right? You can't do that. I think the fact that they're playing the both-and game publicly, at least a lot of the 2020 commitments are, I think that tells you something. Brian Kephart also gives you a good name. He says, my breakout sophomore is Tyson Campbell. I believe that Campbell, if that is indeed true, and y'all know I've been really high on Tyson Campbell and was even a pretty strong defender of his even last year when he was receiving some fan criticism. If Tyson Campbell is a true breakout player, then I believe that Georgia's in the national championship business in a big, big way. And that's not me just trying to be like a sunshine pump or whatever. I think there are a few positions in particular that if you get a major performance, if you get a big-time performance, I think that changes the tone and tenor of the entire season for UGA. If Tyson Campbell plays like a 5-star cornerback, opposite of what I believe that Eric Stokes is right now, I think that secondary is the kind of thing that can match up with the huge crop of Clemson wide receivers and the huge crop of Alabama wide receivers. If that becomes kind of like replacement level performance where, you've got a rotation of a Devod Wilson and a Tyson Campbell and a whomever else. Somebody mentioned Amir Speed in the comment section over here on YouTube before. I think it remains to be seen what a lot of those 2017 defensive back signings other than Stokes are going to do this year. I think that's still very much up in the air. But if you have a kind of an uncertain, unsettled situation at that one cornerback spot, that could also be the reason that you don't compete for a national championship. That could be the reason you miss the playoff. I just think that secondary is becoming, and even, even a show like this where we kind of talk about everything, I think we still kind of underrate just how important defensive secondaries are in national championship games. We said this yesterday, that you build your team a certain way so that you win your regular season games easily. But when you get to the playoff, it becomes a different kind of game. It becomes a game a little bit more like the NFL. Well, listen, secondary play has never been more important in the NFL than it is right now. So against Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, one of those teams like that, probably even Ohio State, probably too, one of those teams like that, your defensive secondary is incredibly, incredibly important. So if Tyson Campbell, as Brian Kephart suggested, is a breakout star, you better get your popcorn ready. VTW talks about Charlie Warner. I know Connor's written about him a good bit at DawgNation.com. It was Jarvis Hanna that asked about Amir Speed. Yeah, Jarvis, thanks for getting that comment. I think that's a good one. I think you put Speed in the category with Brainy and, that large group of 2017 signees, defensive backs, where, you've seen Stokes become a real blossoming star, and some of those other guys you're still kind of waiting on, and I get the impression because of the depth of the secondary, you may still be waiting a while longer on them. Brian McPhail says, I just don't see UGA losing 2 games. If they lose in the SEC championship, I doubt they make the playoff. And I think that what Brian says at the end of that comment, I think you've got to keep this in mind all season long, that Alabama as a non-SEC championship got the playoff nod in 2017. If Georgia's in that same spot in 2019, I don't think it gets the same benefit of the doubt. And to be fair and balanced for a moment, there may be an argument that Alabama deserved the benefit of the doubt because they won the national championship and because they had proven themselves over the course of a number of years. That Georgia, to this point in time, it's beaten Oklahoma in the playoff. It's got an SEC championship, but it doesn't have, obviously, the track record of proof that Alabama does. So kind of a neutral observer to this discussion might say, well, of course you give Alabama the benefit of the doubt. Look how much this program's done. Georgia, conversely, hasn't done enough to get that same benefit of the doubt. Whether it's fair or unfair, I just believe it's true. That what Brian said, if Georgia's not the SEC champion, I don't care what its record is, if it's not the SEC champion, I don't believe Georgia will make the playoff this year, which makes the stakes really, really high to get it done come December. Hashim Spike says he picks Kearis Jackson as his breakout player. I think it's a good name from a talent standpoint. Honesty does compel me to admit, though, I think that Kearis is facing a little bit of an uphill climb on the depth chart. I think that Kearis finished the spring rated below Demetrius Robertson. I'm making that assumption based on the fact that before Robertson got sick on G-Day, Robertson was supposed to be in the red team offense, Jackson was supposed to be in the black. That does not mean, that's not set in stone. That's not a binding contract, but it is an assumption I'm willing to make, and some of the stuff that Kirby said about both players throughout the spring led me to think that too. So if you're behind D-Rob, just for the sake of conversation, if you will agree with me for a moment, if you're behind D-Rob at the end of spring, what happens when Blaylock comes in? So Kearis could still win this competition throughout the summer, but as it stands right now, Kearis has got a little bit of a depth chart issue he's trying to battle up against. Robert Barnes says if you want to be able to attack the quarterback more, Your defensive backs must be able to play man-to-man. I think Robert's right about that. And, listen, my thing about attacking the quarterback is, and I've been a broken record on this, I don't want to blitz to do it. I want to see one-on-one battles won. So I understand where Robert's coming from. That's certainly a very agreeable point about football. I think this is also about just the standard one-on-one battle with, if Jalen Waddle is on the field as Alabama's third receiver, kind of the slot receiver in the middle, you better hope you're third cornerback. You better hope you're, when you have a defensive back type star in the game, you better hope that third cornerback is as good as Alabama's third receiver. That's a one-on-one battle you're going to win. You better hope those cornerbacks in those one-on-one situations are able to win those battles against the Judys and the Devontae Smiths. If you ever get that head-to-head matchup against Clemson, it'd be very much the same way. You got to hope that you can win those one-on-one battles. So for me, my lockdown secondary is not so much about freeing up my linebackers to do a bunch of blitzing. I don't necessarily want to do that. It's about just winning the head-to-head battle that exists because these top teams have stockpiled some really elite wide receivers. Matt Rukavina, boy, he's Matt is a traveler. He's in California now. Is he at the U.S. Open in Pebble Beach this weekend, I wonder?
I hope so.
That'd be great. Lawrence Cager as a breakout for Jarvis Hanna. Is Jarvis Hanna doing both comment sections? That's pretty impressive. I can barely read comments in both comment sections. Jarvis is posting in both comment sections. I'm a
little disappointed in the audience today.
Why? What'd they do?
A lot of good answers. Adam Anderson, Eric Stokes. There's a slam dunk on here that no one has said yet. I have not once seen the mention of one Zamir White.
Okay, so I'm going to defend the audience for a little bit, and this is going to be a tepid defense. Zamir's already so well known by Georgia fans that I don't know they would consider him a breakout player, whereas like Brian Herrien would be more of a breakout player. This is kind of, if we're going to do off-season college football talk, we have to have some agreed-upon definitions. Herrien playing better than his current level of fame would make him a breakout. I don't know that Zamir White could play better than his current level of fame.
Oh, I think he can.
But I'm talking about given where his current level of fame is.
He also in terms of actual on-field production. I mean,
every tweet or Instagram post that White sends gets attention.
Yeah.
A lot of attention. So he's already pretty famous.
And, I think most Georgia fans expect him to break out and have a big year. That's why I'm kind of surprised that no one in the audience just thought, I'm just going to take the easy layup.
This is incredibly tedious. I just think that me and the audience, are probably defining the word breakout slightly different than you are. I think we're defining it as pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Zamir, there is no pleasant surprise. There is no, oh, good. I
don't know about that. I think if he has 800 yards, 5-6 touchdowns, I think people will be very happy with that.
I think it could be a great situation for Georgia. I don't know that our audience is necessarily going to be thrilled about that. I think our audience thinks the sky's the limit for Zamir White. I think our audience thinks that he could get 1,200 yards.
The question was, who isn't a pleasant surprise? The question is, who do you think is a breakout player?
I guess that's just how I define breakout. But I think that White's an interesting answer. Along those lines, do you agree with what I said yesterday and I have said for a while, that the pecking order for Georgia running backs may look more like a balance among three backs this year, more so than that hierarchy that we've kind of seen in place the last couple of years?
I would agree with that. I think the thing I'm most interested to see is how much more of a workload does DeAndre Swift take on? Now, obviously, he wasn't healthy to start last season, but if he is healthy to start this season, what does his workload sort of look like? And then how does that sort of trickle down to affect the carries that White and Herrien end up getting?
Yeah, I'll ask that same question in a slightly different way. Last year, we saw Swift limited by the coaching staff. Come to find out, it's probably because of the groin injury that Swift revealed. But apart from injuries, would the coaching staff still choose to limit Swift? Or if they thought he was 100%, would they feel free to just put the pedal to the metal and give him a Nick Chubb-style workload or one of these other SEC back-style workloads? Would they choose to limit him even if he was 100% healthy?
Yeah.
Joel Moody says, if Zeus gets 1,200 yards, we will all be looking up at red and black confetti. I love the way that Joel says that. Is it that cut and dry? Is that one of those numbers a 1,200-yard season for Zamir White, does that guarantee a national championship?
I don't know if there's a number for Zamir White that guarantees success, because I think the higher Zamir's theoretical numbers get, maybe the smaller DeAndre Swift's numbers get. And Georgia was very successful last year, and it was at its best when DeAndre Swift was getting the ball a lot and was at his best.
Yeah, I think that I kind of agree with Connor on this too, that I love the way Joel phrased his statement. I do think, though, that there is a scenario in which that Zamir could get like 1,200 yards, which would be an incredible season. Mm-hmm. I think there's a scenario by which he could get 1,200 yards that would not guarantee success other places.
Right.
I hate to even say this, but does 1,200 yards for Zamir mean that either Harrion or Swift got hurt? At that point in time, that's maybe not as great as it could be.
Right. Or does it mean, if Zamir is 1,200 yards and DeAndre Swift does 1,200 yards, what does the Georgia passing situation look like?
Yeah. If to use Joel's statement, we're going to be looking up at red and black confetti. The number that gets me there quicker is, and I may be slightly off my numbers here, but like 44 touchdowns from Fromm or something like that. That's if all of a sudden he takes his touch, because what was he, 30-something a year ago?
Yeah, he was 30, exactly.
Is it 30 exactly? All right, so maybe 44 is too much of a jump. Let's say it's 38 maybe, or something along those lines. There's a threshold of achievement that Fromm could obtain, because I'm pretty sure I know what the Georgia running game is going to be, but if you give me the additional numbers of Fromm, at that point in time, that's a red and black confetti type thing right there. So I think it's a really good topic and a really good way to kind of get into that discussion. Joseph Kennedy says, I think that Swift getting 1,900 yards might equal a national championship. Boy, can you imagine the hype? Just the out of control. What if DeAndre Swift is heading towards the possibility of a 2,000-yard season? You know what Georgia fans would be doing? We'd have to do a separate show just devoted to DeAndre Swift. Mm-hmm. We'd have to do at 1 p.m. We'd have to do a Swift hour. That would be an incredible, incredible thing. Doug Rayburn, though, also brings up in all this running back conversation, where does that leave James Cook? And I think that James Cook needs to find his yards on special teams. Maybe I'd love to see him returning some kind of kick. And he needs to find those in the passing game. Not to say that he can't be a ball carrier, traditional running back. I think he can be, but just given if all hands are on deck and everybody's healthy, there are going to be a lot of carries going to Swift and Harrion and Zamir. I really hope they can find a way to get James Cook involved in the passing game.
Mm-hmm. I think that passing game, again, I think it all sort of relates back to how much they choose to use DeAndre Swift. If they want to use him and try and maximize him this year because they have a really good feeling he's going to be gone, a lot of those pass receptions might go towards James Cook, or might go toward, theoretically, the passes that DeAndre Swift would catch, those go to him. Whereas if they're trying to rest and save DeAndre Swift for the course of a 15-game season, I certainly think there's a very good opportunity for James Cook to sort of emerge as a pass-catching back in those sort of third and long, third and distance situations.
Yeah, you think about the idea of an all-purpose back. That's what all-purpose backs are used for in the NFL. They are, those
Shane Vereen type.
Yeah, you got guys that catch passes on third down. I'd love to see Georgia establish that kind of creativity when it's got these kind of weapons to use. I don't want to spend long on this, but I am curious about your thoughts on Dabo Swinney, both the fact that it was said in February, only became controversial this week. That's really odd. And is this some sort of ding in the otherwise pretty strong reputation for Swinney as a younger guy? I don't know if youth matters in this, but you come at life from a slightly different perspective than me. What'd you make of Swinney getting kind of caught up in this?
No, I think he just made a bad joke. I guess, anytime you can compare yourself to someone who's responsible for the death of thousands, I guess you shouldn't do it. As far as the outrage, I think it'd be, a lot better directed at maybe the congressional hearing that happened yesterday regarding the 9/11 and getting those people health insurance. I think we're better off directing it at that, and why these people are still, having to decide, as John Stewart so eloquently put, between having to decide to live or having a place to live. As far as a ding against Clemson, I think it just shows that, maybe there's a little arrogance from Swinney that he thinks he can sort of pull off this comparison, pull off this type of joke, and think it's going to be okay with a large amount of people, just given sort of, what Osama bin Laden represented in the 21st century. But as far as, this is, Dabo needs to be punished, this is terrible, he just told a joke that didn't land.
Yeah, for the most part, I agree with that. I think that, not every bad joke needs to be met with, like, huge outrage.
We don't need to get the pitchforks out.
Yeah, but it's the kind of thing I don't think Kirby Smart would make this mistake.
No.
I think whatever gene you have that makes you wise enough to avoid this kind of stuff, I think Kirby has that. I think that's probably good for Kirby that he does. Joseph Kennedy says it was a joke, but something a coach probably shouldn't say. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably pretty well said from Joe on that. Al Birchfield says, I've always thought that UGA used James Cook wrong, but he's there, use him. And I think part of the issue here is there's only so much playing time to go around. And so, we just spent a couple of minutes talking about how James Cook could be a big factor and a big weapon on third down. But if you put him as a receiving option there, somebody mentioned Kearis Jackson before. If James Cook's getting those passes, there's nothing left to go around for Kearis Jackson. And there may not be as much left to go around for Demetrius Robertson or Dominic Blaylock. So this is not just Cook compared to the other running backs, but this is also Cook compared to everyone who could potentially fill the same role that he does. And, we kind of always bet the over on all of these statistical props during the offseason, but there's just not enough touches to go around. Georgia does not run 100 plays a game, and it never will. And so the individual stats for every player is going to be hurt because of that. I guess the only thing I would add as a final point on him is don't be too quick to assume that he's unhappy because of that. We've seen a lot of examples lately of guys who are not number one on the depth chart grinding to try to get there, working hard to try to make that name for themselves and establish themselves in that regard. And it wouldn't surprise me if James Cook is very much the same way. TJ Clausen says, I think 3 backs are going to get 1,000 yards this year. So all 3 getting 1,000 would be pretty amazing. I'm a lot more comfortable saying that I think there's a possibility that Georgia can get a total of 3,000 from 3 backs.
James Kelee coming out, busting out the triple option. If we're getting 3,000-yard rushers, 3,000 I actually do think is attainable. 3 1,000-yard rushers, I don't know about that. And
because the truth is, if you're getting 3,000-yard rushers, you're probably rushing for like 3,500 yards, and that may be more rushing yards than I want, which is kind of a crazy thing to say, but that may be the case there. So I think between the 3, you could get 3,000, and if it's like 888, 800, 800, 800, or 800, 800, 900, or something along those lines, that ain't so bad either. Just getting 3 guys coming close to 3,000 yards is not such a bad thing on all this either. I think that Georgia in 2017 was dominant with the running game and pretty good with the pass. I think the recipe for winning a national championship this year, if it is going to happen, is to remain dominant with the running game and add that extra dimension to the passing game. I think that's the missing piece for Georgia. All the recent national championship teams have thrown the ball well. It's been a long time since like 2011 when, Alabama and LSU are competing for national championships without throwing the ball much. We've seen quarterbacks play a big role in national championships now for a while. And ironically, they haven't always been experienced quarterbacks. For the most part, they really haven't been experienced quarterbacks. But I think Fromm's experience can still matter. It can make him a better quarterback. And one way or another, playing like a top-flight elite quarterback has become really important in the pursuit of a national championship.
I think, with the Georgia offense this year, I think the big thing to look for is sort of those explosive passing plays, those downfield, 20-plus yards, 30-plus yard chunk plays. That's, Georgia got a few of those this year, but I imagine when Bill Connelly puts out his Georgia preview, I think maybe the issue where Georgia might fall a little bit more to the pack is that, they didn't necessarily have the explosive passing plays, certainly compared to Alabama and Clemson, but even to some of the other sort of elite programs last year.
Nor were they creative enough with passing plays and short yardage situations as well, and that's a big part of the Georgia story too. Jimmy Guthrie says the bottom line is we have awesome depth at running back. The cream will rise to the top and get the most carries. I think Jimmy's right about that. I think it's also really interesting that we've now talked about running backs a lot. We haven't mentioned the incoming freshman Kenny McIntosh really at all. My assumption is that McIntosh is going to at least start this competition off in that number 5 position behind the 3 guys I assume play the most and James Cook. What do you guys think, comment section-wise? Connor, you can weigh in on this too. I mean, is there a chance that Kenny McIntosh leapfrogs somebody before the end of the season?
I'd be very, very surprised if that were the case. Just given sort of the pedigree, I mean, maybe White if he's not healthy and they, just decide to, really take it slow there. Cook, there's been some talk about the coaching staff not being particularly thrilled with him, and he's had to put on more weight, to sort of bulk up. But I don't really see him. The only way I see him is if, maybe Zamir White and Brian Herrien aren't effective in the short yardage game this year, and they just maybe want to give the ball to McIntosh like a few times to sort of, where he can go in, not have, like a 4, 5, 6 yard run, but get those necessary 2 to 3 yard runs.
Funny comment from Kibo Weir, who says, if I see a 1 yard stop at the goal line 2 plays in a row, I'm selling my UGA degree. That just goes to show you the frustration that existed with the goal line stuff from a year ago. Rito and Daniel Brookshire says, remember Kirby's comment that balance is what's working. If passing is working that day, then running may be working the next week. That's what Dano says in the comment section. I think that's true, that balance is not necessarily defined by the 50-50 stuff. I think what scares you about that a little bit, though, Dano, if you'll allow me to be honest, is the LSU game's a perfect example of seemingly abandoning the run after Kirby had said for years they would never do that. They would always keep chopping. Georgia didn't keep chopping against LSU, and I think some of the reasons why are probably over my head from a football standpoint, but they didn't keep chopping there that day. And so balance being what's working in any given game, we got a pretty significant example a year ago of that philosophy not really working. And so I guess it's at least worth pointing that out.
Demetri Sullivan brings up in 2017, Chubb, Michelle, and DeAndre Swift all finished with 3,000 yards.
Yeah.
And I think to get there, they're going to have to play 15 games at least.
Yeah, which would be I'm available for 15 games.
Yeah, we're hoping we get 15 games this year.
My schedule's open. Philip Sharp says that Fromm needs to throw the ball more towards the middle of the field. And I think if you looked at a heat map for Fromm, one of these things where it kind of shows his tendencies, I think you would see that he probably throws short middle maybe more than you might think, but probably doesn't throw deep middle nearly enough. I think that's an area in which he does need to improve. Now, if you want to go back to 2017 from a completion percentage standpoint, Fromm was pretty accurate on deep throws. He's like more than 40-something% on his deep throws, 20 or more yards down the field. But I think historically he probably hasn't hit the deep middle route as much as he needs to. And listen, we've done some side-by-side comparisons with Fromm and Tua as of late. The one thing Tua's pretty good at is Tua sprinkled the infield pretty well. He spread the ball around pretty well. And while I think there's a lot of areas in which Fromm has already surpassed Tua, maybe more so than the average fan might think, that's one area where I'd love to see more from Fromm. I believe, if I were to see all the data on this, it'd back my point up. I believe Fromm probably needs to have a couple fewer tendencies, strong tendencies than he currently has, be a little more, a little bit more like Tua, who seems to spread the ball around a little bit more regularly.
And, an example of that, last year in the SEC championship game, Georgia did a great job taking away Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and sort of those outside passes that Alabama really thrived on. But Alabama is sort of in that second half of the game, they were able to adapt and say, all right, if you're so worried about Jeudy and Ruggs on the outside stretches of the field, we're just going to hit you over and over again with Jalen Waddle in the middle of the field. And they adapted, broke off a big play. He ended up having the best day of any Alabama wide receiver. And, I think Waddle's performance that day and sort of that small tweak and adjustment in the passing game did really help Alabama in that game.
Groon D says something interesting about Fromm on YouTube. Let me see if I can find this. Groon was basically talking about that, I don't see the comment now, but basically talking about how Fromm does need to, lock in on one receiver, needs to be more involved. I think you'd have a hard time saying a year ago that Fromm was locked in on any one receiver. Ridley, Hardman, and who's the third? It wasn't Godwin. He wasn't the number 3 receiver. Holloman, I guess. They all had about the same receiving yards. They were all right there.
Yeah,
in that kind of
they were all
yard.
in that 400 and 600 yard range.
So that they all spread it out pretty well. Godwin was actually a little lower last year than he had been the previous year. And Nada had a pretty good
30 catches, 400
yards. Something yards a year ago. Now 2017, it's pretty clear that late in the season that they were really feeding it to Javon Wims. That's true. But last year, Fromm did not key in on any one receiver more than the other. I mean, if anything, I think this year a true number 1 target does need to emerge. It's one of the reasons why, even if it's not George Pickens, I love the language that Terrence Edwards, the former Georgia receiver, has used to describe Pickens. Oh, he's a true number one receiver. I actually go the opposite direction of our commenter. I think Georgia does need that true number one receiver. Not that you kind of force it to like a volume shooter in a basketball game, but someone that you really can really depend on when the game's on the line. So I actually wouldn't mind seeing a little hierarchy established among the Georgia receivers. They didn't have very much of that at all a year ago. What else?
Nathan Edwards, I think it's an interesting comment. Which team survives a quarterback injury the best? Georgia, Alabama, or Clemson?
Well, I don't think any of the three would survive it for a full season.
Yeah, full season. Yeah, certainly not the case. I think there was an earlier question, if Fromm goes down in like the third game or fourth game of the year, how many games Georgia could win? If Fromm misses a significant amount of time, I think the ceiling goes from a 12-win national championship type team to maybe at best like a 7 or 8 win team.
And this is why what I've said before I think is proven true. Clemson's an elite team, but as an elite team, it's still an advantage to play an easy schedule. So the answer to this question is Clemson, because of the fact that it's a lot easier to beat North Carolina State if you've got Chase Bryce playing quarterback for you. Other than the three big SEC West games, Alabama would have a little bit of an easier time. I don't know if the schedule is dramatically different than the Georgia schedule is, but it's some of their games that have a little bit of easier time. Georgia's got kind of a tricky schedule this year. Some of those games would be pretty tough. If you say 7 or 8, I think there's a chance that Georgia's a big enough favorite in most of its games. They could probably still win without. So if you're saying 7 or 8, I may say they could go 9-3 over the course of the season.
I could certainly see 9, like the right 9-3 situation. I think
10-2 or 11-1 would be very hard to do. Very hard to do. I do. So I think that Clemson would have the easiest time because they play the easiest schedule of all those.
Yep.
So Hugh on YouTube says that he thinks that Bennett's a better backup than Mac Jones because of our offensive line. I don't know if I would agree with you that. I mean, Mac Jones had a lot of other SEC offers, so you got to be
committed to Kentucky.
You got to be a little respectful of him when it comes to who he is as a quarterback. But the point about the Georgia offensive line is kind of an interesting one. And I'm just going to say for the sake of argument, let's say you have a certain level of quarterback. Does that level go up because you are going to have a full 3 seconds to throw? You are going to have a running game that can help take the pressure off of you. You are going to have an opportunity to kind of not feel like the weight of the game is on your shoulder. I don't know that Hugh's making an incorrect point there. That you put a Stetson Bennett behind this Georgia offensive line, he does become a better quarterback. I think that's probably true. I am still probably more skeptical of Georgia's ability to win games in that situation than some of y'all would be, but I don't think Hugh's wrong about that. The presence of the offensive line, the presence of the running game, even the presence of some of this wide receiver talent would make the job of Bennett a lot easier.
I would agree with that. If Bennett is playing a lot next year, I actually do think there's a really good chance Georgia might finish with 3 1,000-yard rushers. The offense, if Bennett's in there, theoretically is going to look a lot different. They're going to be running the ball with the quarterback, I would think, a lot more theoretically, just given Bennett's skill set. But even then, you have to weigh the pros and cons of them doing that because that's sort of what Bennett's best skill set might be. But also, if he gets hurt, then you're really, really, in a bad place when it comes to quarterback. Not that Dwan Mathis couldn't come in and, steer the car, but, we're not. If again, the larger point here, if Jake Fromm goes down, I think and misses an extended period of time, I think Georgia's national championship aspirations go down with him.
I unfortunately probably agree with you on that. Dean Butler says, you guys don't have nearly enough confidence in our backup quarterbacks. The coaches will coach them up and tweak the play calling to keep us winning. So let me kind of go with Dean's point here for a moment. When Fromm stepped in 2017 after Eason got hurt, Fromm became really good right away at something that I think he still utilizes today. He steps up the line of scrimmage. He decides where a good target is seemingly before the ball is snapped, and he delivers the ball very quickly to that target. Bennett has said before that he's looking forward to learning from Fromm. Mathis has said the same thing. Carson Beck said the same thing. That could be one of the things that they could learn from Fromm, and to use Dean's point, that coaches could utilize in a situation where you had to play extended snaps without Fromm in the game, that that you could use that kind of quick read, quick release, make a good first quick decision, even if it's not the best ultimate decision, use that to your advantage. Fromm became a much better quarterback over the course of the 2017 season, but he was never incompetent as a player, even against Notre Dame in his first start, because he was kind of pretty good at kind of reading the defense when he stepped up to the line of scrimmage. However, the one retort I will give to Dean is, Dean says that he means Connor and I, we don't give enough respect to the Georgia backup quarterbacks. I think some of y'all are guilty of not realizing how easy Fromm has made the quarterback position at Georgia look. I think some of you are doing a disservice to Fromm by saying, anybody could just step in and do what Jake Fromm has done. I think Fromm has made the position and the success that he's obtained, I think he's made it look far easier than it actually is.
Yeah, I think that's sort of my larger point is I think in this sense, Fromm might be a little underrated in terms of just everything he brings to the table. And, because Fromm does so much at the line of scrimmage, expecting another quarterback to go in there and sort of make those calls, that's going to be an adjustment in and of itself. And, maybe Stetson Bennett can handle that, but we haven't, sort of seen that yet from him. So I think the big thing is just, Fromm, while it might not show up always on the stat sheet in the big Patrick Mahomes type passes, he does so much for this team that I don't know if even the most competent of backups could come in and sort of replace what he does and what he does well for this Georgia offense.
On the subject of the other backup, Dimitri Sullivan in our YouTube comment section says, I think Dwan Mathis could still deliver. Stars don't mean a player isn't better than he's rated. I mean, the kid was headed to Ohio State. He's no slouch. So, Connor, here's my question about Mathis for a moment. Are we out of the woods from a health standpoint enough now that we can kind of go back to talking about Mathis as a football player again?
I'm not a doctor, but, anytime you have brain surgery, I think you have to be, extremely cautious there, especially with a sport that has as much head trauma associated with it as football. So, until we get farther down the line and into fall camp, I mean, it wouldn't shock me at all if they're sort of keeping Dwan out of drills in August just because they are so worried about the potential of still recovering from that brain surgery.
Yeah, so there you have that, Dimitri. I don't feel confident about the medical stuff one way or another, other than to say the news that we've gotten thus far has all been good, and so I think sooner rather than later we'll be talking about Mathis as a football player again. I think when Kirby was asked about it back in Destin a couple of weeks ago, at that point in time it was still fresh enough, and Kirby's words carry a lot more weight than mine do. So he was very careful with how he spoke about it, saying we're worried about a lot more stuff than football timelines when it comes to Dwan Mathis. That's kind of what he has to say in that moment because he kind of speaks from the official position. But it could very well be that Mathis's first year on campus is greatly impacted by the fact that he had a major health issue, and I don't know how limited that makes him for the full year, but if it limits him early on, there's going to be a domino effect for how that affects him October, November, and potentially into December, where he may have been teetering on the brink of being a redshirt anyway, and this may really kind of push that back to the side of this is a year for learning and watching. But there are a lot of guys who'll tell you that watching is not such a bad thing. In fact, I think that Jacob Eason, if he were to be very honest right now, would say that after being, I'm guessing that Eason probably started the first game of his freshman season in high school. I'm guessing that he's probably, played every snap he was eligible to take up until the point where, he left the field because of an injury at Georgia. My guess is that Eason probably learned a good bit by watching, and he's probably ready to kind of, utilize some of that to his advantage at Washington here this year. So if you want to, place a long-term bet on Mathis, or you're just a fan of Mathis and you hope to see him get his chance, if he spends some time watching this year early on because of an injury, that actually may be a really good opportunity. We saw this with some of the injured linebackers this spring, where like Tresman Marshall and Ryan Davis weren't going through practice very much, but boy, they're standing there and their heads are on a swivel. They're observing everything. Sometimes when you don't have the physical pressure to perform during practice, it may leave you more capacity to absorb the things you can learn, and Mathis may really benefit from that.
Right, and the other thing, if Mathis is missing time in August, like over the course of the season, they're not going to be scripting out a lot of like first-team reps or high-pressure reps for Mathis while they're game planning and preparing for the season that way. So if he misses considerable amount of time in August, you certainly wonder what the trickle-down effect of that would be over the course of the season.
All right, on a different subject, but an equally important subject, David Gross says that he thinks that Dan Mullen uses hairspray. Do you think that Mullen uses hairspray, Connor?
I mean, I think like any good man, he uses product. That's just, the age we live in now. Hairspray specifically, I don't know enough about what hair looks like with hairspray. And he's wearing a hat most of the time on game days, so
Mullen wears a hat?
Doesn't he? Yeah. Doesn't he wear a visor?
I guess maybe he does. For some reason, I don't really picture him wearing one, but I guess maybe he does. I feel like Mullen uses you know what pomade is, like the stuff from the Mad Men era. I feel like he uses that. I think that Mullen's hair is heavily product. Now, of course, glass houses here. My hair is typically pretty heavily product as well. But I think that Mullen uses. Okay, there's the hat.
Right there.
Yeah, good job. Boy, talk about Connor. Talk about Connor just firing on all cylinders here. He's going to some video to prove his point. This is a lot more upscale than the R.S. Andrews cool down used to be, if that's what's going to happen here. So I think he used like a pomade type thing. Mm-hmm. I sort of think Dan Mullen looks like a mortician.
I don't hang around enough morticians to know what a mortician
kind of feel like he looks a little bit like a mortician. Like kind of an old school funeral parlor director. I've always felt that way. Mm-hmm. David Gross is bringing up McElwain's teeth. I'm not even sure, even with McElwain out of the SEC, I'm not quite sure yet it's okay to make fun of McElwain's teeth again. The statute of limitations on those teeth may still not quite be that might not quite be up yet, but I certainly know where you're coming from on that. What else we got? Anything else in your mind, Connor?
No, not particularly much.
Johnny Underhill says that Mullet uses Dollar General gel. I could see him getting
him going cheap on the.
I could see him because here's the difference. Cheaper hair product is very sticky. It's like the kind of thing that you can't get it off your hands. I mean, it's just the stickiest substance known to man. The more expensive stuff is not quite as sticky typically. It kind of clumps in one spot in your hair. Yeah, so there's that. Mm-hmm. There's that for sure. What are you about to say? You have something else in your mind?
Go Bruins tonight, Game 7.
Oh, don't do this.
It's been a few months since Boston's had a championship parade.
Please don't do this.
I think we really need another one. There are thousands of kids that know how Game of Thrones ends, know how the Avengers ends, but they don't know what it's like to taste a Boston championship. So hoping the good guys can pull it out tonight against St. Louis.
Oh my gosh. Brian McPhail says that Mullet uses decommit cream. Boy, yeah, there's a lot of that. I think that Jervon Dexter's the next one. I think that Dexter's out of that class pretty soon. This is just wild, rampant speculation. But one way or another, I think he is. I think he might be the next one of these decommits to come. And I have a good time with all of this stuff, but I do think from as objective a perspective as I can find, I think we've reached kind of a mini crisis for the Florida 2020 class, have we not?
Wait, repeat that. Sorry, I was looking at comments.
I think we've reached, if you want to have an objective analysis of Florida, the flurry of decommitments they have had, the lack of involvement with some of the top players in the state of Florida, I do think this is kind of a mini crisis, not just saying that from a wishful thinking standpoint, but just objectively, they're not doing well with recruiting right now. They ought to be doing better than this.
Right, and I believe their number one overall recruit just released their number one overall commit, Leonard Manuel, just released the top seven.
Yeah, so that's not a good
look.
That
doesn't sound like a commit to me.
That's not a good look. Top 7's a lot.
They need, if from a Florida fan perspective, they need good recruiting news in the worst way, but as a Georgia fan, man, you just hate to see it. Florida really struggling on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, boy.
Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of fans.
Listen, that's not bad at all. All right, let's do a couple Facebook comments and we'll get ready to get out of here. Robert Barnes continuing the belief that the mullet thing is not about hair, it's about the fish. I'm still going to get a mullet fish, let that thing swim around here on the desk at some point in time. Keith and Dana Barfield also bringing up Leonard Manuel there as well. Nathan Edwards says we need an Athens parade more. Yeah, listen.
I'd love to be there for an Athens parade.
Every time I'm in Athens, I have to admit I do think about like what the route would be for a championship parade. Where would it start? Where would it finish? What would it be like? I mean, it would be about the most fun day you could ever imagine. It's clearly wrapping its way through downtown. It probably finishes at Sanford Stadium, in the stadium. You'd probably do that. I think eventually, like, the governor would bring the team to Atlanta, and they would honor them on the steps of the state capitol. Probably not a parade in Atlanta. That's probably what it'd be. But it's easy to let your mind wander about what that would be like.
I think so. It leaves from Buttsmere, the facilities and stuff, goes down Lumpkin, books around Broad, circles back up to Millage, and then goes back down to Lumpkin again and ends at Sanford Stadium.
Yeah. Where do you think the best place to watch it from would be?
I have a very personal vote. That would be Magnolia's Bar on Broad Street. One of my favorites.
Rooftop at the Georgia Theater wouldn't be too bad.
That'd be pretty good. Might be a little high, a little hard to see. But that's a good one.
I think I just want to soak up the atmosphere. You know what I'm saying? I'd want to see the rest of the crowd. I'd want to see as much of the crowd as I possibly could.
So there's also the arch, but there's that like island in the middle between like the arch on one side of the street and the what is now a Chick-fil-A on the other side of the street.
That'd be good.
I think right there in the middle of that, I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad at all. It's a fun thing to think about. Maybe one of these days we'll actually get to see it in person. By the way, before we get ready to go here today, let me remind you about my friends at the AJC. Some really good stuff at the AJC every single day. It's one of the reasons why you want to check in throughout the day to get your Atlanta news now. I thought that Maureen Downey had a really good column yesterday, and this matters to me because of the fact that I got young kids, and school start times are kind of a big issue. Especially for some of these kids that don't like waking up super early. Well, Marine had a great column on that in the AJC. You can check that out at AJC.com. And great coverage continuing of Falcons minicamp going on right now as well, for those of you who are interested in that. Of course, the Braves continue to rock and roll. Big home run barrage last night. You can read all of this at AJC.com. Get your Atlanta news now from AJC.com. And, by the way, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews Cool Down to you. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. They play all those positions. But this time of year, it's likely the air conditioning you're thinking about more than anything else. That's why you want their $99 Smiley tune-up. They'll get your system back to factory fresh specs, and you will truly be smiling once that house is oh so cool, which this time of year is a very important thing. Y'all have a great day. I'll see you this afternoon for Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger with Jeff Sintel. Tomorrow evening for DawgNation Days of Summer at Callaway Resort and Gardens, and, of course, here at 10 a.m. tomorrow as well for DawgNation Daily. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to speaking to you then.